This story is titled, "My Parents Spontaneously Organized a Party for Their Golden Daughter where they announced she was their only child, but I calmly exposed the truth in front of everyone, leaving them all completely speechless." Hey Reddit, you know how some people are completely obsessed with appearances, even when there's absolutely nothing of substance underneath? That's my mom, Victoria, in a nutshell. Her entire life revolves around her image and how she's perceived by the outside world. And guess what? That's exactly how she runs her so-called non-profit too. I'm Lily, by the way. For as long as I can remember, my mom has spent years making me feel like an afterthought while putting my stepsister Megan on a pedestal. Don't get me wrong, Megan isn't actually a bad person. She's just oblivious. In my mom's eyes, Megan is the perfect daughter. She's got the looks, the charm, and the uncanny ability to show up at events dressed in designer clothes and act like she's single-handedly saving the world. Meanwhile, I'm the one actually doing all the real work. Night after night, I'm in the office until late, managing the logistics and finances for the nonprofit, while Megan gets all the credit for representing the mission. The nonprofit is supposedly about empowering women and creating opportunities for those who need them most. On the surface, it's all shiny and impressive, galas, donor dinners, those giant novelty check presentations. But I've always felt like it was less about helping people and more about giving mom an excuse to rub elbows with wealthy socialites. Still, I tried to convince myself that at least some of the money must be going to good causes, right? Well, I was dead wrong about that. It all started one night when I was working late as usual. I was going over the quarterly budget, double-checking some numbers for an upcoming report. That's when I noticed something odd. This massive expense marked as administrative costs. It didn't make any sense. I mean, I understand that events can be expensive, but this number was absolutely ridiculous. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars that didn't seem to match up with anything I'd seen before. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. Maybe someone had mislabeled a donation or misfiled an expense. These things happen in any organization. But the more I looked into it, the weirder it got. There were charges for luxury vacations, high-end jewelry, and even private jets. Things that had absolutely nothing to do with the nonprofit's mission of empowering women. I kept digging deeper, and that's when I saw his name, Ethan. He's Megan's boyfriend, and honestly, he's a guy I've never trusted. He's slick, always dressed like he's walking into a GQ photo shoot, and somehow manages to worm his way into every conversation at family events. He's one of those people who talks a lot without actually saying anything meaningful. You probably know the type. Anyway, what I discovered was shocking. It turns out Ethan wasn't just Megan's boyfriend. He was actively siphoning money out of the nonprofit's accounts. That's right. Ethan was using donor money to fund his ridiculous lifestyle. He'd set up fake invoices and business accounts to make everything look legitimate, but the transactions were clearly personal. We're talking luxury cars, a penthouse apartment in Chicago, and even a massive chunk of change funneled into his failing tech startup. And here's the part that really made my stomach turn. My mom was signing off on all of it. At this point, I was absolutely furious. I mean, I've always known my mom favors Megan. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. Growing up, Megan could do no wrong in her eyes. If she got a mere participation ribbon at school, Mom acted like she just won a Nobel Prize. Meanwhile, I could be pulling straight A's, and it was just expected. No celebration, no recognition, just a nod and maybe a distracted good job if I was lucky. But this wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was theft. And not just any kind of theft. It was stealing from people who genuinely needed help. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sat there for hours, going through every file, every transaction, every document I could find. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Ethan had been on the payroll for consulting services, even though he didn't actually do anything meaningful for the organization. Mom had approved countless fake expenses under his name, and the money wasn't going anywhere near the programs we were supposed to be funding. By the time I finally closed my laptop that night, I felt like I didn't even know who my mother was anymore. It wasn't just about the money, though that was bad enough. It was about the sheer audacity of it all. She wasn't just complicit in this scheme. She was actively orchestrating the whole thing. And Megan? At first, I thought she had to be in on it too. I mean, how could she not know what was happening? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Ethan was probably using her just like he was using the nonprofit. She was just a convenient cover, a way to make everything look legitimate and above board. Then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife even deeper, Mom announced the gala. She called a family dinner to make the big reveal, gushing about how proud she was of Megan and how this upcoming event would celebrate her amazing contributions to the organization. I just sat there staring at her, wondering if she even remembered that I existed. Megan's contributions? What contributions? Megan doesn't even know how the nonprofit actually operates. Her only contribution is showing up at events in a designer dress and smiling for the cameras. Meanwhile, I'm the one handling all the spreadsheets, writing the grant proposals, and making sure the lights stay on. But apparently, none of that matters in Mom's world. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up right there at the dinner table and tell everyone what I'd found. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I forced a smile and pretended to be happy for Megan. I needed more time to figure out what to do next. I wasn't just going to let this slide. If Mom wanted to throw Megan a party and pretend I didn't exist, fine. But I wasn't going to sit there quietly and watch her get away with this massive fraud. The thing is, after uncovering the mess Mom and Ethan had made of the nonprofit, I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. The scale of what they were doing was way beyond anything I'd ever dealt with before. Sure, I'd managed budgets and tracked finances for years, but this wasn't just some misplaced decimal point or a questionable purchase. This was full-blown, systematic fraud. The first person I thought to tell was Nathan, my co-worker. Nathan's been working with me at the nonprofit for a few years, mostly in grant writing and program management, but he's also one of the few people I trust completely. He's sharp, no nonsense, and not afraid to call things out when they're wrong. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess and figure out what to do next, it was him. I caught Nathan in his office the next morning. My heart was pounding as I approached his door, the weight of what I'd discovered making each step feel heavier. "Got a minute?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as I shut the door behind me. "Sure," he said, looking up from his laptop. His brow furrowed slightly as he took in my expression. "You look stressed." "That's putting it lightly," I replied with a humorless laugh, dropping a thick folder onto his desk. The sound it made seemed to echo in the small office. "You're not going to believe this." Nathan started flipping through the papers, his eyebrows furrowing deeper with every page. The silence in the room grew heavier as he absorbed what he was seeing. By the time he got to the end, he looked up at me with an incredulous expression that mirrored exactly how I'd felt when I first discovered everything. "Lily, this isn't just sketchy, this is criminal," he said, his voice low but intense. "Exactly," I said, nodding emphatically. "And it gets worse. Those accounts, they're all tied to Ethan." Nathan leaned back in his chair, letting out a low whistle as he processed this information. "Of course they are. That guy gives me bad vibes every time he shows up here." He shook his head in disgust before looking back at me. "And you're saying your mom's approving all this?" "Every single transaction," I confirmed, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Her signature's on everything." Nathan shook his head again, more slowly this time. "This isn't just turning a blind eye. She's actively helping him. She's part of it." Hearing him say it out loud made it all feel even more real. Up until that moment, part of me had been hoping I was wrong, that maybe there was some explanation I hadn't thought of, some misunderstanding that would make all of this less horrible than it seemed. But there wasn't. Mom was in this up to her neck, and Ethan was just as bad, if not worse. "What do you want to do?" Nathan asked, his tone serious now. His eyes were fixed on mine, and I could tell he was already mentally preparing for whatever came next. "I need to figure out just how far this goes," I said, determination replacing some of the shock and hurt I'd been feeling. "And I need your help." He nodded without hesitation. "I'm in." From that moment on, Nathan became my partner in unraveling the tangled web of lies Mom and Ethan had created. We spent every spare moment digging through financial records, emails, and contracts. The deeper we went, the more disturbing it got. Ethan wasn't just using the nonprofit's funds to live a lavish lifestyle. He was pouring a huge chunk of it into a failing tech company under his name. It was one of those startups that sounds impressive on paper but doesn't actually do anything substantive. According to the records, he'd been using the nonprofit's money to keep the company afloat, paying salaries to employees who didn't exist, and inflating the company's value to attract investors. It was a house of cards, and the nonprofit was the foundation holding it all up. "What's even the end game here?" I asked Nathan one afternoon as we sifted through another stack of documents. We'd been at it for hours, and my eyes were starting to blur from staring at numbers and signatures. "Does he think no one's going to notice?" Nathan shrugged, rubbing his tired eyes. "Guys like Ethan never think they're going to get caught. They rely on people not paying attention." He gestured to the piles of paper surrounding us. "And honestly, most people wouldn't. If you weren't handling the finances, this probably would have gone unnoticed for years." He wasn't wrong. The nonprofit's financials were complicated, and most of the board members didn't have the time or the expertise to dig into the details. Mom had surrounded herself with people who trusted her completely, and she used that trust to get away with everything she and Ethan were doing. By the end of the week, Nathan and I had pieced together a pretty damning case. We'd found emails between Mom and Ethan discussing how to label certain expenses to avoid scrutiny. There were fake invoices for consulting services that Ethan had submitted, along with receipts for things like luxury vacations and designer clothes. And then there was the money going to his tech company, a massive amount that was impossible to justify by any legitimate means. "This guy is a fraud," Nathan said as we stared at the spreadsheet on his laptop. The numbers were staggering, far worse than either of us had initially suspected. "And your mom's his accomplice. They've been working this scam for years." Hearing it laid out so plainly made my stomach turn. I'd always known my mom was ambitious and image-conscious, but this wasn't just ambition. This was pure greed. And the worst part was that she was using Megan as a pawn to keep the charade going. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Megan was being used as the face of the nonprofit, the golden child who gave everything credibility. Ethan was dating her for the same reason. She was a shield, someone they could point to whenever anyone asked questions about where the money was going or what the organization was actually accomplishing. "Megan has no idea, does she?" Nathan asked, his voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "None," I said, shaking my head. "She probably thinks Ethan's a great guy and that Mom's just trying to help him get his company off the ground." Nathan shook his head sadly. "That poor girl. She's going to be devastated when she finds out." I didn't have the heart to tell him that Megan and I weren't exactly close. We'd grown up in the same house, but we might as well have been strangers. Mom had always pitted us against each other, and Megan had bought into it completely. She didn't see me as a sister. She saw me as competition, someone to outshine and overshadow. But even so, she didn't deserve this. Nobody did. As Nathan and I worked late into the night, I couldn't help but wonder how far Mom and Ethan were willing to go. Were they planning to expand their scheme? Would they drag the entire nonprofit down with them if it meant keeping their lavish lifestyle intact? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. By the time we wrapped up for the night, we had enough evidence to blow the whole thing wide open. But I wasn't ready to go public just yet. I needed to figure out the right time and place to confront them, and I needed to make sure I had backup when I did. "What's the plan?" Nathan asked as we packed up our things, the weight of everything we'd discovered hanging heavily in the air between us. I thought about the gala Mom was planning, the event where she planned to honor Megan and pretend everything was perfect. It was going to be full of donors, board members, and press, all the people who'd been funding the nonprofit without knowing where their money was really going. "The gala," I said, determination hardening my voice. "That's when we do it." Nathan raised an eyebrow, looking both impressed and a little concerned. "You sure?" "Absolutely," I said with more confidence than I actually felt. "If Mom wants to play favorites, fine, but she's not going to like how this plays out." As I walked out of the office that night, I felt a mix of anger, determination, and something else, maybe a little hope. For the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. Mom and Ethan thought they were untouchable, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The week of the gala, everything felt tenser than usual. Mom was buzzing with excitement, going full-on control freak over the smallest details. Invitations had been sent out to every influential donor, politician, and business person she could think of. It wasn't just about celebrating Megan. It was about showing off the nonprofit's power and reach. To her, this event was a chance to secure even more clout and connections, maybe even bigger donations that they could funnel into their schemes. I was doing my best to keep my head down, pretending I wasn't on to her and Ethan's elaborate fraud. Every time I saw her bustling around the office or making calls about the gala, I had to fight the urge to throw the evidence in her face right then and there. But I knew I had to play it cool. If she got even a whiff of what I was planning, she'd shut it all down before I could expose her. Then out of nowhere, Megan called me. That alone was weird. We're not exactly close, and she's not the kind of person to just check in. "Hey, Lily," she said when I answered, her voice quieter than usual, lacking its typical confidence. "Do you have a second?" "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral even as my curiosity piqued. "What's up?" There was a pause, and for a moment I thought she might back out of whatever she wanted to say. Then she sighed, the sound heavy with worry. "I don't know. Something feels off." This caught me completely off guard. Megan's never been one to question anything, especially when it comes to Mom or Ethan. She's always played the role of the golden child perfectly, smiling through every event and parroting whatever Mom wanted her to say. To hear doubt in her voice was like witnessing a glitch in the Matrix. "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely curious about what could have possibly made her start questioning things now. "Ethan's been acting weird," she said, her voice still unnaturally subdued. "Distant, distracted, and Mom's been all over him about some big announcement they're planning for the gala. Every time I ask about it, they brush me off. I feel like I'm missing something important." I had to physically stop myself from blurting out the truth right then and there. It would have been so easy to tell her everything, about the embezzlement, the fake expenses, all of it. But I knew that wasn't the right move. Not yet, anyway. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is." She let out another sigh, this one sounding more frustrated than the last. "Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Do you think Ethan might be hiding something?" "Oh, Megan, if only you knew how right you are," I thought to myself. "The man you love is stealing millions from the nonprofit with Mom's help. He's using you as a smokescreen for his crimes. Your entire relationship might be built on convenience rather than love." But all I said was, "I think it's worth paying attention to. Asking questions, seeing how they react. If Ethan's acting different, there's probably a reason." She was quiet for a moment, considering my words. "You're right. Thanks, Lily," she finally said, sounding slightly more resolved. When she hung up, I just sat there staring at my phone, my mind racing. For the first time, I felt like Megan might not be as complicit as I'd thought. Maybe she really was just a pawn in their game, completely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. But that didn't make her any less of a problem. Whether she knew it or not, she was the face of their entire operation, the shiny distraction they used to keep everyone from looking too closely at the books. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as everyone prepared for the gala. Mom was in full event planner mode, barking orders at the staff and obsessing over every tiny detail from the centerpieces to the lighting design. Megan, on the other hand, seemed different. She wasn't her usual confident, carefree self. She looked distracted, like she had something on her mind that she couldn't quite shake. At one point during a planning meeting, I caught her staring at Ethan with a troubled expression. He was busy schmoozing with a donor, his charm dialed up to 11 as always, all smooth talk and practiced smiles. But Megan wasn't smiling. She looked almost suspicious. It was a look I'd never seen on her face before, especially not directed at Ethan. Later that afternoon, she cornered me in the break room when I went to get coffee. She glanced around to make sure we were alone before speaking. "Have you noticed anything weird about Ethan lately?" she asked, her voice low as if she was afraid of being overheard. I played dumb even as my heart rate picked up. "Like what?" "I don't know," she said, frowning as she struggled to articulate her concerns. "He's been spending a lot of time on his phone, taking calls in private, and every time I ask what he's up to, he gets defensive. It's not like him to be so secretive." I shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Maybe he's just stressed. The gala is a big deal." She didn't look convinced. "Maybe, but it's not just him. Mom's been acting weird too. She's been pushing me to rehearse this speech for the gala, but she won't tell me what it's about. She just keeps saying it'll be a big moment." My stomach churned with anxiety as Megan mentioned the big moment. I had no doubt that whatever big moment Mom was planning would involve some kind of announcement designed to legitimize their scheme. They were probably planning to use Megan to pitch their fake projects to the donors, making her the unwitting face of their elaborate scam without her even realizing it. The thought made me sick. "Have you tried asking Mom directly?" I suggested, keeping my voice as neutral as possible while my mind raced with the implications. Megan rolled her eyes, a glimpse of her usual demeanor showing through her worry. "You know how she is. Everything has to be a surprise, and she gets all defensive if I push too hard. But I don't like it, Lily. Something about this doesn't feel right." For the first time, I saw a crack in Megan's perfect facade. She wasn't just the golden child anymore. She was starting to question things, to look beneath the polished surface of her world. It was almost surreal to witness. "Look," I said, feeling a surprising urge to actually help her. "If you're feeling uneasy, trust yourself. Keep your eyes open and don't let anyone pressure you into doing something you're not comfortable with." She gave me a small nod, the gesture somewhere between grateful and uncertain. "Yeah, thanks." Over the next couple of days, I noticed Megan pulling away from Ethan and Mom more and more. She wasn't as enthusiastic about the gala as before, and she started skipping planning meetings, sending last-minute excuses about needing to be somewhere else. Her sudden absence didn't go unnoticed, especially by Mom. Mom was absolutely fuming, complaining to anyone who would listen about how ungrateful Megan was being. I overheard her one afternoon during a particularly loud rant in her office, the door barely muffling her anger. "She doesn't understand how important this is," Mom practically shouted, her frustration evident even through the walls. "After everything I've done for her, you'd think she'd have a little appreciation." I stayed quiet, pretending I couldn't hear as I worked at my desk. But inside, I felt a small spark of satisfaction. Megan was finally starting to see through them, even if she didn't fully understand what she was seeing yet. The night before the gala, Megan called me again. It was late, past 11, and I was still up going over the final details of my plan with Nathan via text. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told me, her voice sounding stronger than it had in our previous conversations. "And I think you're right. Something's not adding up." "What are you going to do?" I asked, curious about how far she was willing to go in her questioning. "I don't know yet," she admitted. and I could almost picture her running her hand through her hair, a nervous habit she'd had since we were kids. But I'm not going to just go along with whatever Mom and Ethan are planning. If they won't tell me the truth, I'll figure it out myself. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope regarding Megan. Maybe she wasn't as trapped as I'd thought. Maybe she could actually help me bring the whole thing down. Still, I knew I couldn't count on her completely. She might be questioning things, but that didn't mean she was ready to take a stand against Mom and Ethan. I'd spent years being treated like an outsider in my own family, and I wasn't about to put all my faith in Megan now, not when I was so close to exposing everything. The gala was less than 24 hours away, and the stage was set. Mom and Ethan thought they had everything under control, but they didn't realize how close they were to losing it all. I felt nervous, excited, and terrified all at once. There would be no going back after tomorrow night. The gala was set to be the event of the year, or at least that's how Mom kept hyping it up. In her eyes, this was more than just a party. It was her crowning achievement, the pinnacle of her social climbing. She'd been bragging for weeks about how every important donor, socialite, and local politician would be there. She kept saying it was all to honor Megan's incredible contributions to the nonprofit, but I knew the real reason. This wasn't about Megan. It was about showing off, about cementing Mom's place in this world of wealth and influence she'd manipulated her way into. When I arrived at the venue on the night of the gala, I was struck by how extravagant everything was. The entire place looked like something out of a movie, sparkling chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, gold-trimmed decor everywhere you looked, and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly rent. A massive screen was set up on stage, running a slideshow of Megan's pictures, shots of her at charity events, smiling at previous galas, posing with donors. It was like a shrine to her, carefully curated by Mom to present the perfect image of philanthropic success. The room was already packed when I got there. People were milling around in expensive outfits, sipping champagne and congratulating each other on how charitable they were. It was exactly the kind of crowd that loves to feel good about giving back without ever getting their hands dirty with actual work. I spotted Ethan almost immediately in the crowd. He was laughing with a group of donors, gesturing animatedly with a glass of champagne in hand, like he didn't have a care in the world. His designer suit probably cost more than what most people make in a month, likely paid for with money that was supposed to help underprivileged women. Megan was by his side, looking as radiant as ever in a shimmering gown, but there was something different about her tonight. Her usual confidence seemed forced, like she was trying too hard to play the role Mom had assigned her. The smile on her face didn't quite reach her eyes. As I walked through the crowd, I kept my head down, avoiding small talk and politely sidestepping conversations. I wasn't here to mingle or network. I was here to end this charade once and for all. The evidence Nathan and I had gathered was tucked safely in my clutch, burning a hole in my conscience. I was just waiting for the right moment to blow everything up. About halfway through the evening, the lights dimmed and Mom took the stage. The spotlight hit her perfectly, no doubt after multiple rehearsals, and she was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. She tapped the microphone gently and thanked everyone for coming, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "Tonight is a very special night," she began, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing gracefully as she spoke. "We're here to celebrate the incredible contributions of my only daughter, Megan." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment it felt like time stopped. The phrase echoed in my head, each syllable a fresh slap in the face. "Only daughter?" I muttered to myself, the shock giving way to a burning anger that rose from the pit of my stomach. I'd known Mom was dismissive of me, but to publicly erase my existence? That was a new low, even for her. My blood boiled as applause erupted around the room. People were nodding and smiling, completely oblivious to the fact that Mom had just disowned her other daughter in front of a room full of people. She continued gushing about Megan's dedication and how she was the heart and soul of the organization. She made it sound like Megan was single-handedly saving the world while the rest of us were just along for the ride. I couldn't sit there and let her get away with it. Not this time. Not after everything I'd discovered. Something inside me snapped. I stood up from my table and walked purposefully to the center of the room, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The applause was still echoing throughout the venue when I raised my voice. "Mom," I called out loudly, my voice cutting through the din, "if Megan's your only daughter, why is she unknowingly funding Ethan's fraudulent tech company?" The room went dead silent. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire gathering. Every head turned toward me, and for a moment all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Mom froze on stage, her smile slipping for just a second before she recovered her composure with the skill of a seasoned performer. "Lily," she said, her tone sharp but measured as if addressing a misbehaving child, "this isn't the time or place for—" "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I interrupted, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Everyone here deserves to know how their donations are being spent." The moment the words left my mouth, the room practically exploded with reaction. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as everyone tried to make sense of what I'd just said. I could see shock, confusion, and growing concern on the faces of donors and board members. Megan stood frozen near the stage, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What is she talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky but loud enough to cut through the growing noise. She looked from me to Mom, searching for answers. Mom, ever the master manipulator, plastered on her tight, strained smile, the one she used when things weren't going according to her meticulously planned script. "Lily," she said, her tone dripping with fake calm, "let's not ruin this beautiful night with your misunderstandings." Misunderstandings? I couldn't help but laugh, a sharp, humorless sound that drew even more eyes to me. She really thought she could gaslight her way out of this, dismiss years of fraud and theft as a simple misunderstanding. It was so typical of her to try to diminish me, to make me sound confused or irrational rather than face the truth. "Misunderstandings," I repeated, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Is that what we're calling funneling donor money into Ethan's personal accounts? Megan," I turned to address my stepsister directly, "he's been using you to cover up a multi-million-dollar scam." All eyes turned to Megan, who looked like she was about to collapse. The color had drained from her face, and her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock in her expression. She whipped around to face Ethan, her voice trembling as she asked the question I could see burning in her eyes. "Tell me she's lying." Ethan froze like a deer in headlights, his smooth confidence evaporating instantly. He glanced frantically between Megan and Mom, as if hoping one of them would jump in and save him. "She doesn't know what she's saying," he stammered, trying and failing to keep his cool. His hand was shaking slightly as he ran it through his perfectly styled hair. "This is all just some big mistake." I held up the folder in my hand, the one containing all the evidence Nathan and I had meticulously gathered. "Oh, it's no mistake. I have proof, bank records, emails, invoices, everything. It's all here. You two have been stealing from this nonprofit for years." The murmurs around the room grew louder, more insistent. A few of the donors in the crowd started pulling out their phones, no doubt ready to Google Ethan's company or call their accountants to double-check their donations. The atmosphere had shifted completely. The elegant celebration now felt like the scene of a crime being uncovered in real time. Megan's gaze shifted from Ethan to Mom, tears welling up in her eyes, threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. "You knew?" she asked, her voice cracking with emotion. The betrayal on her face was raw and unmistakable. Mom, who was finally starting to show cracks in her usually impenetrable armor, raised a hand like she was trying to calm everyone down. "Darling, it's complicated," she began, her tone soft, almost pleading. She took a step toward Megan, reaching out as if to comfort her. But Megan wasn't having it. She backed away from Mom's outstretched hand like it might burn her. "No," she said firmly, taking another step back. "It's simple. You betrayed me." The weight of her words seemed to hang in the air, silencing even the murmurs that had been growing around us. It was as if everyone in the room collectively held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next in this unexpected drama. Mom's smile finally faltered completely, and for the first time, I saw something close to panic in her eyes. This wasn't part of her script. This wasn't how her perfect gala was supposed to go. "Megan," she started again, her voice rising slightly with desperation, "you don't understand." "No, I do understand," Megan interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You used me, both of you. You made me the face of this non-profit so you could line your pockets. How could you?" Ethan, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, tried to step in. He moved toward Megan, reaching for her arm in what looked like an attempt to guide her away from the increasingly hostile crowd. "Megan, baby, come on," he said, his tone cajoling, as if he were talking to a child throwing a tantrum. "Don't touch me," she snapped, jerking away from him with such force that she nearly stumbled. Her eyes were blazing with anger now, the hurt transforming into something harder, more definitive. At that moment, I almost felt bad for Megan, almost. It was clear she'd been kept in the dark about everything, and now her entire world was crashing down around her in the most public way possible. But I couldn't let sympathy cloud the facts. She'd still been complicit, even if she hadn't known it. Her face was on all the campaigns. Her name was tied to every fraudulent program, and whether she liked it or not, she was part of the reason this whole scheme had worked for so long. Meanwhile, the crowd had descended into chaos. People were arguing, whispering, and pointing fingers. The perfectly orchestrated gala had transformed into something resembling a courtroom drama, with everyone taking sides and demanding answers. A few board members had pushed their way to the front of the room, their faces flushed with anger and confusion as they confronted Mom. "What is she talking about, Victoria?" one of them asked sharply, addressing Mom directly. He was an older man with silver hair who I recognized as the chairman of the board. His normally friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by stern suspicion. "Is any of this true?" Mom, who was clearly struggling to maintain her composure, waved her hand dismissively. The gesture was meant to look casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. She was coming undone, and everyone could see it. "This is absurd," she said, trying to regain control of the situation. "Lily's clearly mistaken. She doesn't understand the complexities of running a nonprofit." "Complexities?" I cut in, unable to let her diminish me again. "Is that what you call laundering money through fake programs? Because I have the documents to prove otherwise." I opened the folder I'd been clutching and started passing copies of the evidence to anyone who would take them. Nathan and I had prepared dozens of packets, bank statements, fake invoices, wire transfers. It was all there, laid out in black and white. The evidence was damning and impossible to dismiss. Ethan tried to grab one of the papers from a particularly influential donor, his desperation becoming more obvious by the second. But the man snatched it back, his expression hardening as he scanned the numbers on the page. "Don't even think about it," the donor said, glaring at Ethan with undisguised contempt. At this point, the facade was completely crumbling. Ethan's confident, smooth-talking persona had vanished entirely, replaced by someone who looked like he was ready to bolt for the nearest exit. His eyes darted around the room as if calculating his chances of escape. Mom was still clinging to the remnants of her control, but even she couldn't deny the mountain of evidence literally being handed around the room. As I distributed the last of the documents, Megan turned to me. Tears were streaming down her face, leaving trails in her makeup. In that moment, she looked younger, more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question wasn't accusatory. It was broken, confused. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was complicated. Part of me had wanted to protect her, but another part hadn't trusted her enough to bring her into the plan. I'd assumed she would take Mom's side, as she always had. "Would you have believed me?" I finally said, meeting her gaze directly. She didn't respond, but the look on her face said it all. She wouldn't have. Mom had spent years molding Megan into her perfect little puppet, and it was only now, when the strings were cut, that she realized how trapped she'd been. The chaos reached its peak when one of the donors, a woman in an expensive blue dress, pulled out her phone and started dialing with determined taps of her manicured finger. "Who are you calling?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with panic as he noticed her actions. "The authorities," the donor replied coldly, not bothering to look up from her phone. "This is fraud. You're going to pay for this." Ethan turned to Mom, his voice low but frantic enough that those nearby could hear. "We need to get out of here," he hissed, grabbing her elbow. But before they could make a move toward the exit, two board members stepped in front of them, blocking their path. Both men were tall and imposing in their expensive suits, and they looked thoroughly unimpressed with what they'd just learned. "You're not going anywhere," one of them said firmly, crossing his arms over his chest. For the first time in my life, I saw Mom speechless. She looked around the room, her face pale, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. The shock in her eyes was almost satisfying to witness after years of her dismissing me, erasing me, making me feel invisible in my own family. I stepped back, letting the scene unfold without further intervention. This wasn't my fight anymore. I'd done my part by bringing the truth to light, and now it was up to the people in the room to decide what happened next. As I watched Mom and Ethan squirm under the weight of their own lies, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. For years, I'd been invisible, pushed to the sidelines while they used Megan and the nonprofit to build their empire of deception. But not anymore. This was the beginning of the end for them, and I wasn't going to miss a second of it. If I thought the night couldn't get more dramatic, I was dead wrong. As the crowd erupted into chaos, with people shouting questions and demanding explanations, the sound of doors slamming open cut through the noise like a knife. A loud, commanding voice followed, silencing everyone instantly. "FBI, everyone remain where you are." The room froze as if someone had pressed pause on the pandemonium. People turned toward the entrance, where a group of agents in dark jackets with bold yellow lettering moved in with purpose and authority. They weren't here to mingle or make small talk. Their expressions were serious, their movements coordinated and deliberate as they spread throughout the room. I saw one of the agents scan the crowd, his gaze methodical and focused before locking eyes on Ethan and Mom. He made his way through the stunned guests, flanked by two other agents. "Ethan Reynolds and Victoria Hayes," he called out, his voice steady and firm, projecting across the now silent room. "We have warrants for your arrest on charges of fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by an explosion of whispers. If there were any lingering doubts about the validity of what I'd said, they were gone now. The FBI doesn't show up with arrest warrants for misunderstandings. Ethan's face drained of color, becoming almost ghostly under the venue's lighting as two agents approached him. The confidence he'd worn like armor for years had completely evaporated, replaced by naked fear. "Wait!" he yelled, holding up his hands as if to ward them off. "Wait! I can make a deal. I'll cooperate. I'll give you everything." "Shut up!" Mom hissed at him, her composure fracturing completely. She looked like she wanted to strangle him right there in front of everyone. But Ethan wasn't done selling her out. Panic had overtaken any loyalty he might have felt. He pointed at Mom, his voice rising with desperation. "It was her idea. She planned everything. Megan was just a cover to make it look legit." The room collectively inhaled at this betrayal, and I turned to look at Megan. She was standing near the stage, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face, smudging her perfect makeup. This wasn't just betrayal for her. It was a public execution of the image she'd spent her entire life upholding, the life she thought she had. Mom's face turned icy, her usual calculated calm replaced with a venomous glare aimed directly at Ethan. I'd never seen her look at anyone with such pure hatred, not even me during our worst arguments. "You pathetic little weasel," she spat, her voice laced with contempt. Ethan's panic transformed into anger, his survival instinct fully activated. "You're the pathetic one, Victoria," he shot back, his voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're done. You hear me? Done." The agents didn't let the back and forth continue for long. Two of them grabbed Ethan by the arms and started leading him toward the door. He tried to resist for a moment, stumbling over his own feet as he kept shouting over his shoulder. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything, all of it." Meanwhile, another set of agents closed in on Mom. Unlike Ethan, she didn't fight or panic in the same desperate way. Instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and stared straight ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even in handcuffs, being escorted out of her own gala, she was trying to maintain control of her image. It was almost impressive, in a disturbing way, how committed she was to appearances right up until the end. As they escorted her out, the room erupted into a fresh wave of chaos. Donors were shouting, some demanding explanations, others angrily vowing to pull their funding and distance themselves from the scandal. A few board members rushed toward Megan, who looked like she was about to collapse from the shock of it all. I stayed where I was, letting the scene unfold around me. I wasn't about to get in the middle of the mob that had formed. There would be plenty of time for questions later, and I was emotionally exhausted from the confrontation. One of the agents walked over to me, his expression serious but not unkind. He was older than the others, with salt and pepper hair and lines around his eyes that suggested both experience and compassion. "You're Lily, right?" he asked, keeping his voice professional but gentle. I nodded, my heart still pounding from everything that had just unfolded. "Yeah, that's me. We're going to need a statement from you," he said, pulling out a small notepad. "But first, I need to know, are there any other key players involved in this?" I glanced across the room at Megan. She looked utterly destroyed, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently while surrounded by concerned board members. She had been used as the face of this operation for years, but she had been a victim too, a different kind of victim than the donors, but a victim nonetheless. "No," I said finally, making a split-second decision. "It's just them." The agent nodded, seeming to accept my answer without further questioning. "We'll be in touch," he said before walking away to join his colleagues. As he left, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. It was over. The nightmare that had been building for years had finally come crashing down, and while the aftermath would be messy, at least the truth was out now. The next morning, the news was everywhere. Headlines about the nonprofit scandal were plastered across every major outlet in the city, some even making national news. "Prominent nonprofit leaders arrested for fraud and embezzlement," one headline read. Another proclaimed, "Mother and boyfriend betray trust, face federal charges." I scrolled through the articles on my phone, watching as reporters laid out the entire mess in painstaking detail. The nonprofit's accounts had been frozen, Ethan's tech company was under investigation, and the FBI was digging into years of records to trace every dollar they'd stolen. It was surreal to see our family drama splashed across the internet, to read quotes from anonymous sources close to the organization describing the gala's dramatic conclusion. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives were texting me, asking if I was okay, if the reports were true, if I knew this was happening all along. I'd thought that after everything came crashing down, the dust would settle, but it didn't. Not right away. The fallout was brutal and messy, extending far beyond just Mom and Ethan. Ethan's deal with the FBI meant he sang like a canary. Every scheme, every lie, every fraudulent transaction, he laid it all out in excruciating detail, desperate to reduce his own sentence. His testimony, combined with the evidence Nathan and I had collected, made the case airtight. There would be no wriggling out of this for Mom. Mom didn't go down without a fight, of course. She tried to spin her usual narrative, painting herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. "I did what I had to do to save the nonprofit," she told the press in her final interview before the trial, her voice carefully modulated to sound sincere and pained. "I was under immense pressure. It was nonsense, and everyone knew it." The court saw right through her excuses, especially when Ethan's testimony directly implicated her as the mastermind behind the entire operation. In the end, she was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, a term that reflected both the scale of the fraud and her complete lack of remorse. Ethan, being the rat he is, got a lighter sentence, 5 years in exchange for his full cooperation with the authorities. I'm sure he thinks he got off easy, but his reputation is ruined beyond repair. No one in the business world will touch him with a 10-foot pole now. His future of smooth-talking his way into people's wallets is over. Megan took the betrayal incredibly hard. She was devastated, not just by what Mom and Ethan had done, but by how blind she'd been to all of it. For years, she'd been the unwitting face of their scam, smiling for photos and giving speeches without ever realizing she was being used. It was like her entire life up to that point had been ripped out from under her, leaving her with nothing familiar to hold on to. At first, Megan disappeared completely from public view. I didn't hear from her for weeks after the trial concluded. Given our complicated history, I hadn't expected to, but I still found myself wondering how she was coping. The few times I saw her in court, she looked like a shadow of herself, hollow-eyed, much thinner, and stripped of that confident glow she'd always had. But then one day, completely out of the blue, she showed up at my door. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was working from home when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Megan standing there, soaked from the rain, looking exhausted and defeated in a way I'd never seen before. "I don't know who I am without them," she admitted after I invited her in and made her a cup of tea. She stared into the mug, not meeting my eyes. It was one of the rawest, most vulnerable moments I'd ever witnessed from her. Megan, who had always been so polished and perfect, finally let her guard down completely. "You don't have to be anything for anyone anymore," I told her, surprised by my own gentleness. "Figure out who you are for yourself." It wasn't an overnight change, of course. Nothing that profound ever is. But little by little, she started piecing herself back together. She cut off all ties with Mom and Ethan, refusing to even visit Mom in prison despite multiple requests for her to come. "She doesn't deserve my forgiveness," Megan said firmly when she showed me one of Mom's letters. She tore it up without reading beyond the first few lines. I had to admit, there was something almost inspiring about seeing her develop this newfound backbone. As Megan and I spent more time together in the aftermath of the scandal, I realized something surprising. We had more in common than I'd ever thought possible. For years, Mom had pitted us against each other, making us feel like we were competing for her approval and affection. But now that she was out of the picture, there was no competition, no rivalry, just two sisters trying to make sense of the mess we'd been left with. One night over takeout and bad reality TV, we started talking about what we wanted to do next. The nonprofit was gone, officially dissolved as part of the legal fallout. But there were still people out there who'd been counting on its programs, women who needed the support and resources that had been promised to them. "We could just start over," I said, the idea forming as I spoke it. "Build something new from scratch." Megan looked at me, confused by the suggestion. "What do you mean?" "I mean we could build something new, something real this time," I explained, growing more excited as I thought about it. a nonprofit that actually does what it claims to do. She hesitated, uncertainty written all over her face. Do you think anyone would trust us after everything that happened? They trusted Mom, I pointed out, and she used them. If we're honest and transparent from the start, maybe we can rebuild that trust. We'd have to work hard to prove ourselves, but it's not impossible. Nathan was immediately on board when I pitched the idea to him the next day. His face lit up with enthusiasm for the first time since the scandal broke. "It's about time something good came out of this mess," he said, already pulling out his laptop to start making notes. The three of us spent months planning and brainstorming, trying to figure out how to create an organization that would actually make a difference instead of just looking good on paper. Transparency became our guiding principle. Every dollar donated would be accounted for, with detailed breakdowns available to the public at any time. We decided to focus on scholarships and mentorship programs for women in underserved communities, programs that Mom had always claimed to support but never actually funded. These were tangible services with measurable outcomes, not the vague empowerment initiatives that had been perfect covers for Mom's embezzlement. Megan threw herself into the project with a determination I'd never seen from her before. For once, she was using her networking skills and social charm for something meaningful. She reached out to former donors, apologizing for what had happened and asking for their trust in our new venture. Some slammed the door in her face, unwilling to risk being burned again. But others were willing to give us a second chance, impressed by our honesty and concrete plans. Meanwhile, Nathan and I worked on building the infrastructure for our new nonprofit. We spent countless hours setting up bank accounts with proper oversight mechanisms, filing the necessary paperwork to become a registered nonprofit organization, and creating a website that laid everything bare. Our financial records would be completely transparent, our mission clearly defined, and our progress measurable. The first time we awarded a scholarship through our new organization, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: genuine pride. Not the hollow, performative kind of pride Mom used to push on us at her glamorous galas, but real, authentic pride in what we were doing. This wasn't about appearances or social climbing. It was about making an actual difference in someone's life. Megan and I sat in the front row at the small ceremony we'd organized, watching as a young woman named Tasha accepted her award. She was the first in her family to go to college, and she was planning to study engineering. The joy and determination on her face were worth all the hard work and stress we'd put into getting this far. "This is because of you," Megan whispered to me as we applauded, her eyes shining with tears of a different kind than I'd seen months before. "No," I replied, feeling a connection with her I'd never thought possible. "This is because of us." It was a small moment, but it meant everything. For the first time in either of our lives, I felt like we were finally free from Mom's shadow, forging our own path instead of living the one she'd scripted for us. The nonprofit grew slowly but steadily over the following months. We weren't pulling in the kind of money Mom's organization had, and we didn't need to. What we lacked in flash and extravagance, we made up for in authenticity and real impact. Our overhead was low, our expenses reasonable, and every donation went primarily to the people we were trying to help. Megan became the public face of the organization, but this time it was different. She wasn't just a figurehead or a pretty face for promotional materials. She was actively involved, working directly with mentors and scholarship recipients, building genuine relationships with donors, and ensuring that every program was running smoothly. She brought her natural charisma and people skills to the role, but now those talents were being used for something meaningful rather than simply maintaining appearances. Nathan and I stayed more behind the scenes, managing the logistics and keeping the finances airtight. After everything we'd been through with Mom and Ethan, we weren't about to let a single penny go unaccounted for. Every transaction was logged, every expense justified, and all of it available for review by anyone who asked. It was exhausting at times, but it was honest work, something neither of us had fully experienced under Mom's leadership. Every so often, I would find myself thinking about Mom. She was still in prison, probably blaming everyone but herself for what had happened. I imagined her sitting in her cell, plotting her comeback or manipulating the people around her, because that's who she was at her core. Ethan was out by now, though I had no idea where he was, and honestly, I didn't care to know. He was someone else's problem now, hopefully without the resources or credibility to pull off another scam. What I did care about was what Megan, Nathan, and I had built from the ashes of their empire. Mom had spent her entire life chasing control and power, clinging to it at any cost, and in the end, it had destroyed her. But Megan and I were free to be ourselves, free to build something good, free to live without the weight of Mom's expectations and manipulations crushing us. The gala, the scandal, the arrests, the fallout, it all feels like a lifetime ago now, even though it's been less than 2 years. But I'll never forget that night, because it was the turning point that changed everything. It was the night we stopped being pawns in Mom's elaborate game and started writing our own story. That gala was the night everything fell apart, but it was also the night we found the strength to start over. From the wreckage of Mom's corruption and lies, we built something real, something honest, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally doing something that actually matters.